People sometimes ask, what would Jesus do? You see it on bracelets, on tattoos inside the wrist, a reminder to be kinder, more forgiving and understanding, to turn the other cheek. But making a whip, turning over tables, and driving everyone out is also a possibility. This is not gentle Jesus, meek and mild. It is a strange thing he does in the temple in Jerusalem. What's going on here? Why does Jesus do this? The incident in the temple, there's a euphemism for you, appears in all four Gospels of the Bible. It's one of the few episodes in Jesus' life that is common to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But they tell the story differently, and it functions differently in the narrative of Jesus' life. Matthew, Mark, and Luke put this incident in the last week of Jesus' life. Jesus' disruption of the temple right before Passover convinces the Roman and Jewish authorities that Jesus has to be eliminated right away. But John puts the incident in the temple right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. It's the first thing he does in public. The authorities let Jesus live for another 3 years after this. When the gospel accounts conflict like this, the approach I take is to let the gospels disagree. The gospels were not written to convey facts about Jesus' life. They were written to convey the meaning of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. Each gospel writer has their own answer to this. John, in particular, has a unique approach to Jesus. So let's take John on his own terms and ask what the incident in the temple means in John's gospel. Lutheran pastor and scholar Caroline Lewis says that the key to the Gospel of John is the prologue. John tells us who Jesus is and why he has come in his first 18 verses. Lewis says that whenever we get stuck in John, go back to the prologue. It will guide us through the rest of the gospel. The prologue of John begins with the Word, the divine speech and wisdom, the creative, redeeming power of God. The Word has been with God, has been God since the beginning. All things came into being through the Word. The Word became flesh and lived among us in Jesus of Nazareth. We have seen his glory. We have all received from him grace upon grace. No one has ever seen God, John says. It is God, the only Son, the Word made flesh, who has made God known. So there we are. Jesus is the creative, redeeming power of God in human flesh and bone, and he came to make God known. When it is time for the Word made flesh to make himself known, he travels from Capernaum, at the far north of modern-day Israel on the Sea of Galilee, and he goes up to Jerusalem. You always go up to Jerusalem because it's on the top of a hill. It's the highest point for miles around. It is the Feast of Passover, the holiest day in Judaism. And all faithful Jews are supposed to celebrate Passover in Jerusalem if they can. Jesus, being a faithful Jew, goes up to Jerusalem, up to the Temple Mount, to the temple itself, the holiest place in Judaism, the dwelling place of God. Jews can pray anywhere, but the temple is the only place they can offer sacrifices to God as the Hebrew Bible prescribes. To offer sacrifice, you need an animal of the right age and condition. You also need a half-shekel coin to pay the temple tax. So merchants and money changers have set up stalls at the temple, so pilgrims can buy animals and change foreign currency into shekels. It's loud and chaotic. Thousands of people pressing through the narrow streets, bleating sheep and mooing cattle blocking the pavement, money changers shouting, "Best rates over here," doves flapping and cooing inside their cages. Judaism is vibrant and full of life, and the temple precincts are too. It's the perfect spot for a bit of guerrilla theater. As John tells it, Jesus is controlled and deliberate in his actions here. He takes the time to make a whip of cords, maybe even buying the cords before he braids them together. That's not something you can do quickly in the heat of the moment. If Jesus is angry, and John's words do not imply that he is, he would calm down by the time the whip is ready. Jesus knows exactly what he is doing. He uses the whip to drive the cattle and sheep out, pours out the coins of the money changers and flips over their tables, chases off the dove sellers. He waits for the clamor to die down, the sheep and cattle to run off through the narrow streets, the mad scramble to pick up loose coins to end, people to brush themselves off, the temple authorities to arrive and find the person responsible for messing up the smooth functioning of the temple. Jesus is waiting for them, doesn't try to run away. He's got nothing to hide. The authorities question him for the first time. It won't be the last. He says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." They scoff at him. The temple has just been rebuilt and it took decades. What does he mean, 3 days? But Jesus' words, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up," those words explain why he did this. Jesus has disrupted the entire system of the temple with his symbolic act. You can't buy animals and change your coins. You can't make sacrifices to God. You can't make sacrifices to God. The temple stops functioning. People can't encounter God there. That is Jesus' point. You don't need the temple anymore. God is no longer in the building. God is right in front of you, in the Word made flesh, in Jesus. You know Jesus and you know God. You know God here on the streets of Jerusalem. The rest of John's gospel expands on that. Nicodemus, the woman at the well, a man born blind, Mary and Martha of Bethany, Peter, they all meet Jesus. They have these convoluted conversations because John's Jesus cannot answer a question directly. And gradually, each of them realizes that God is right in front of them in Jesus. They receive from him grace upon grace. They go away and their whole lives are transformed. None of these people have to go to the temple in Jerusalem to find God. God comes to them. God makes God's self known right in front of them. God has left the building to be with us in the person of Jesus. If that isn't a metaphor for the last year of church life, I don't know what is. It has been hard, hard, hard to be away from this building. We love this church. I do too, despite my limited acquaintance with it. For 190 years, this building has held the greatest joys and deepest sorrows of thousands of people's lives. Weddings, baptisms, homecomings, funerals. It's the place we could go to fall apart, knowing that God would hold us in God's arms. It's where we could seek God in the silence of holiness, trusting that God would find us here. In T.S. Eliot's words, this is where prayer has been valid. Not being here on Sundays or Wednesday mornings, having to make an appointment to come in and pray, and then only if no one else is here, has hurt deeply. For some of us, it has felt like being separated from God. It has been as disruptive as Jesus driving the cattle and sheep out and flipping over tables in the temple. But when we left the building, God left with us. God doesn't dwell inside four walls anymore. God dwells in human flesh and bone, in the person of Jesus. Wherever Jesus is, God is there, right in front of us. We receive from his fullness grace upon grace. We promise in our baptismal covenant to seek and serve Christ in all persons. Well, that means that every person we meet is Jesus. The ones we see in the flesh and the ones in the little boxes on the screen. Jesus can be anywhere. Jesus is everywhere, making God known. Why would Jesus do this strange thing in the temple at Passover? To proclaim God's abiding presence with us, wherever we are. Perhaps this year of exile from our church building has been an opportunity to see Jesus out there, out in the world that God loves, and an opportunity to be Jesus for others who want to see him. In Jesus, God has been with us and is with us all the while, right here in front of us.